Okay, thank you, Greg. Just a quick thanks for the opportunity to speak today. Something I really enjoy and passionate about. But thank you to Sharon Dundon. So some of this is on behalf of the MLA and their transport hub, which is a really great source of information around the transport industry or setting animals up. Thank you to Future Beef and Beef Central for being part of it. And then, you know, a lot of this work we've been doing on the road with several people with the QTA and with Tom Shepherd in cattle handling as well. But so a quick introduction about myself. I did study for a little bit, not long, and then I was in the meat industry for a little while in the abattoirs, and then I was a meat inspector for a while. I then moved to North Queensland to Cloncurry for the Queensland Livestock and Meat Authority, and was, you know, travelled a fair distance or fair area of North Queensland, was responsible for that. And then I moved to Longreach for a while and Rockhampton, and then I got involved with a company called Ozmeat, and so they were responsible for some primary production things around abattoirs and meat trading languages, meat specifications, feedlots, live exports, sale yards, fruit, veggies, tea, you know, bees, timber, honey, all sorts of things in ag. And then but in all of those roles, I kept a really close association with pastoral divisions, and I enjoy mustering and doing those sorts of things. But I then joined the feedlot industry for 12 years at a very large feedlot and feedlotting backgrounding operation. And then I've been with NAPCO for about 5 years. So I managed Wainui feedlot on the Downs, and then my current role is supply chain manager with the business. So part of that role is to work across the business from one end to the other and look at what we do, work with general managers and work with the managers from breeding to weaning to right through the system to the abattoir. So a couple of things. There's the presentation isn't that extravagant. It's simple slides. And probably one of the things is, you know, I just want to, a lot of what I'm about to show you is not, I'm not a scientist, but I do know that in those periods of working in feedlot and backgrounding systems, it was close to 2 million head that I was responsible for in those times. And so I've seen a lot of things that, you know, and a lot of what you'll see today is based on practical observation and learning from making mistakes. And I've seen the impact that when you do something well over 2 million times or not well, that it has a significant effect on the business from one end to the other. So that's sort of where I come from, and I just want to share with you some of my learning experiences and hope that you get something from it. So why are we here? You know, to hopefully get a bit more knowledge and understand our responsibilities in the supply chain, to set our cattle up for a better life and improve performance for every part of the chain, to understand the effects of cattle handling and what the results of that are. And then I think that we probably sometimes work in isolation a little bit in silos, and just to hopefully understand that what we do is an important part of a bigger picture for everybody. And now ask ourselves, why are we here? You know, I love working with people and cattle and horses, and you know, it drives me to do a lot of things in the industry. Why worry about cattle handling? It's an industry expectation. You know, we are professionals. We should be good at what we do, and we should know what we do. You know, you often get people at events or camp drafts or whatever, and they're sort of not really sure about what we do and why we do it. It's an employer expectation. You know, employees have to, it's an expectation that they represent their company well and or their business well. There's genuine animal welfare responsibilities. We actually love what we do, and there are some things that we don't want to do to animals, and we look after animals every day in a genuine welfare capacity. We often look, I think we actually overlook welfare a little bit in that we think of a broken leg or something like that as being an animal welfare issue. For me, if we do something to cause animals not to eat for 30 days in a way we've handled them or something like that. To me, that's a bigger welfare responsibility than something like an injury. We do have to protect our industry from minority groups. That's not a big focus for me, I don't think. But I think one of the reasons we need to worry about these things is guys like myself and plenty of other customers out there who at the touch of a button now can understand what's happened or what's gone wrong or whether or not there's a business to be made out of this. You know, years ago we didn't have a lot of data and a lot of systems, but there is so much data and it's so quick to get now, and it tells you results instantly. There's three components to any part of the business, and that's the prior to the processing the animals, what happens in the paddock and those sorts of areas. There's the processing, the handling component of it, the trucking, the yards. Then there's after the processing, what happens when we've turned them back out again, or the next bloke. So the big message for today is, what we do at all stages of supply chain has a significant effect on the animals for the rest of their life. So it doesn't, one of the things I do see a bit is when somebody shuts the gate on the truck or the loading ramp, there's all the animals are alive and they're on a truck. So we think we've done a good job. Probably my message is we actually don't know we've done a good job for a week, for a month, for 3 months, or for the rest of that animal's life. So, it's really important that we understand what's going to happen to that animal. Here's just an example of the supply chain and the effect that we have. So, a company like the company I work for, we have control of all of those parts of the supply chain. But if you can see my cursor, if a breeding operation, so whenever we handle an animal, it is very possible that we will affect them for 10 days. It'll affect, it'll affect nutrition, it'll affect all sorts of things within that animal, and they'll probably, it'll take them 10 days to return to where they were. That's if we do it well. If we don't do it well, it can be 30 days, it can be months. So I've put together a bit of a thing here, but you can see that, even if there's probably 11 parts of that process where if we even do it well, we're going to disrupt their life for 110 days. So if we're talking about an animal that is, we're hoping to be processed within 24 months or 2 years, that's a large part of their life cycle that they're recovering from something we did to them. If we didn't do it so well and it took 30 days to recover, you can see there that it took 330 days out of that animal's production cycle. So what we do at every part of that is significant, and it probably leads into the next part of my slide, in that, if you want to set cattle up and make money out of business, the recipes are obviously more units, more weight, and less days to cash. So if we're talking about reducing the time it takes to get an animal to cash, and there's a difference of 110 days to 330 days, it is so easy to reduce that time. If we look at some things, there's a lot of evidence. So there's an MLA published report that, cattle that are weaned well or educated well when they're young, even 90 days in the feedlot, they're still worth $25 a head more. So, a year or 2 years after we started handling them, it's still having an effect. I think the big question is, we just think about putting them on a truck. The really big question for me is, what is the next person going to do with these animals? Do they want performance out of them? Do they want breeding? Are they going for slaughter? And when you determine that and what's best for them, then you can work your business around setting them up better for yourself, but also for the next person, and how you're going to load them, and when, and what you're going to feed them, all of those sorts of things. The three effects of handling it influences their behaviour for the rest of their life. They learn so quickly. I actually think cattle are extremely smart and learn within 1 or 2 times. It affects their health, their performance, and their welfare, and it also affects the yield and quality of those animals. So actually, it's fairly simple for cattle to do well. They've got to be set up mentally and physically, be able to walk around, do their job, do the things they need to do. They've got to be healthy, free from parasites, diseases and injuries. And while that one sounds simple, it's still amazing how many people don't really have a parasite control program, or they do, treating for parasites, but with no real information around that, or diseases. There's people have very good vaccination programs and people that don't. Those little things make massive differences. Injuries that we don't see, and I'll go on to some of those later. They don't show up for a while. We need them to eat more, and when they do eat more, we need them to be able to digest it efficiently. So a healthy gut, good clean water, those sorts of things. And the secret recipe with cattle is just consistency. Just keep doing the same thing at the same time, the same way, as long as it's the right way, and they'll get through it. They don't like changes at all. They're a creature of habit. They become very routine very, very quickly. They eat most at 8 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Generally, that moves a little bit with sunlight and weather. They eat in the same place. They very quickly become adapted to hanging around the same areas and eating in the same place. If in a feed bunk situation, even if they're slick or there's no food in front of them, but there's feed just up the bunk somewhere else, they don't go and eat it usually. They eat between 7 and 25 kilograms per head per day. And I'll go into a chart in a minute. That one there is so vital, and it's actually the secret to a lot of things. The other thing I will mention is that I'll talk about feedlotting a bit, because I have a lot of data and I've seen a lot of things around feedlotting, but it's actually animal biology. They are the same in the paddock as they are in the feedlot, and they don't all of a sudden become a feedlot animal. They have natural behaviours and instincts and responses. So there's a lot of trial work, and I've seen exactly the same things in the paddocks that I've seen in feedlotting operations, but I'll just use the data that I have seen from a feedlot point of view. So cattle, you can see there, it's a pretty rough drawing, but if you had cattle eating, say, for example, 14 or 15 kilos, and something happens where the feed isn't the same, or they're upset, or the nutrition isn't the same, or it's a different time, what happens is they won't eat for a little bit, and then they'll go in and gorge themselves, and then they'll feel sort of not well, so they won't eat for a few hours or half a day or a day, and by then they get really hungry, so they race in and eat. And I hope everyone can see my cursor, but once that bouncing starts, it's really difficult to control that, and it gets out of control, and it just gets worse. It takes, and animals take recovery from that. So it's a down. If you can't control that fishtailing, then you'll get out of whack, and it takes some getting back. Some of them never come back. So it's basically going from high consumptions to low consumptions fairly quickly. That's a chart there on cattle eating patterns. So you can see there on the bottom is the times. So at about 8 o'clock, and that moves a little bit, they go in and they will have quite bigger aggressive chews, and you can see it's not a long feeding period. Interestingly, it's usually around there, that 9, 9:15, 9:30, that animals seem to start to want to walk away. Then they come back at about 4 and they eat for longer periods and more bites. That will move a little bit, and you'll get cattle that'll eat at midnight and stuff like that generally. But this is so cattle they eat for about a third of their time. They then chew their cud for about a third of their day, and then they just they rest for a third of their day. So. And that fits in with that. Now, that's the same, pretty similar in paddock situations as well when you look at eating patterns. I want to probably talk about feed. Now we're talking about feeding hay. there's a couple of things here I want to go through. This is really important stuff, I think, and there's five principles here, but 4 of them are very important. But so when you're feeding hay, it's important to think about hygiene and wastage. You know, we don't want hay that's got mold and those sorts of things. Cattle are actually extremely fussy. If you see 30 or 40 kilos left where it shouldn't be, you can guarantee there is the smallest amount of dirt or manure or mold or something like that there, and they will not go near it. And so hay wastage on the ground, all of those sort of things are pretty big issues on a large scale. But there are these, I'll go through these four principles, and I think that if you're not meeting all 4 of these, then you're probably not feeding the animals like we think we are. So number 1 is when you're feeding hay, it must be good quality hay. You know, a minimum of 8 to 10 megajoules of energy for dry matter, and 8% crude protein, and more than 58% digestibility, especially for younger, more fragile animals. But we do feed a lot of pasture hay in North Australia. The reasoning behind that is probably the gut microbes. It is so vital that we look after those microbes in the belly. So we'll get on to that later. So you can get feed tests and that, but it's a good practice to go and get the right quality hay, and I'll show you why in a minute. They need to have sufficient access to that hay, so at least 15 to 20 centimetres per head, and we'll cover that more shortly. It needs to be a correct and consistent time, so they become very behavioural and so we actually start feeding at 9 o'clock on the dot, and not 1 minute before, not 1 minute after, and that's the effect it has. But there is actually chemical and physical things that happen to animals to cause hunger and eating patterns. So even I think driving a feed truck or a motorbike or a tractor past a feed area has a massive effect. And so the idea with that is try and find a time that suits you. You know, it's no good feeding weaners at 8 o'clock this morning and then feeding them at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. It sends them nuts, and then it starts that bouncing. You know, they race in, have a feed and panic. Next day they don't eat, or there's feed in front of them. You know, you mightn't have fed them till 4 o'clock. Next morning it's there at 7 o'clock, and it just starts all sorts of issues with the animals. It needs to be the correct amount, 2 to 2.5, 2.5% body weight. So good measure for that is if it's a 250 kilo weaner, needs about 5 or 6 kilos. And so if you're using big square bales, they're normally 500 or 600 kilos, so that would feed 100 head. Some things around that is, I'll just go to the next one. This is a good example. So we go out and we buy a bale of hay, and it's 8 to 10 megajoules of energy, and we put it out at the right time, put it out at 7 o'clock in the morning or whenever it is. And it was the right amount. It was for 100 head. So it's a 600 kilo bale, so it's the right amount. But was it the right space? So if we look at a hay bale there, 2 metres by 1 metre, there's only about 10 head along one side, 5, 10 and 5. So 30 head get access to that hay bale, and they can actually eat that hay bale as well. In quantity wise. So, there's a number of things that and that happens quite regularly, they need the space. So spread it out, or, put them in at different, in different groups or smaller groups. Put more hay there, so at least if it is gone, we quite often turn up and there's a little tiny bit of hay left and we think, oh, that was just perfect, but actually only 30 or 40 of those animals actually got any of that hay. You could, put your animals in the right weight group so they're not bullying each other. and those sorts of things. A really good example of that was some cattle came down from up north. When they when they got to us, there was a fair shrink on them. When we did a bit of a review on them, it was like 17% shrink or something. It's pretty high. But there was when we really looked at it, there was a certain amount, about 10 to 15% of that mob, excuse me, that actually did okay, and the rest did worse than we thought. So when we checked the trip down, they'd been fed square bale up there, right amount, right quality, all of those things. They were spelled and fed another square bale, and then when they got to us, we normally put them out and put them in, spread it out in a bunk, but that day they didn't. They went on to a hay feeder, and so you can see that the same animals got access to that hay on the whole trip. So space around hay is really important, but all four of those things are extremely important. There's a really good picture in my eyes. So that is the same amount of energy in hay. So we're talking pretty much any animal, but a weaner, it's almost impossible for them to even eat that much feed on the right. No doubt the feed on the left. So when we buy cheap hay or low quality hay, that's what you're buying, and there's no way an animal can eat that. Around about time, just an example, you can see these are some old dates, but that's our targeted feed start time. It was 7 o'clock, we've moved that. And you can see that out of those 5 of those days, they were dead bang on 7 o'clock, and one day they were 2 minutes out. So you'd want to be looking, why were they out like that? Water's absolutely vital. It's actually probably more important than feed in my eyes. Even a short period off water has some pretty long-term effects. It needs to be, terms off water can take 10 days to recover to months, milk production, all sorts of things. So it's really important to have a really regular trough cleaning program. Yards, I think, at least once a week, and there's plenty of properties doing their troughs once a week, out in the paddocks as well. There is a significant correlation between good clean water and eating patterns. The first thing we do if they're not eating what they should is go and check the water, and you can guarantee that's what it is. Just a bit of a demo that little tiny things have a massive influence in big operations. And so, what we can do, what are the things we can do better today? What are some little things to work on? Plan everything, be ready to do the job you're going to do and be ready for the animal's sake. I just want to talk about some little examples of how things matter, little tiny things. So if we have a 20,000 head operation, for an example, and there's probably plenty of people listening that do, $1 per head per day is plus or minus $7.3 million. So you can make, it's very easy to lose $1. It's harder to make one. So you can, every time you do that, you're possibly mucking around with $7 million. Every 100 grams we can get them to eat is a $100,000 increase. So just a little tiny handful of feed. If we can get them to convert at 6 kilos of ration or consumption, doesn't matter what it is, to 1 kilo of beef, if we can reduce that from 7 kilos down to 6 kilos, it's for another $5 million. These things are all very easy to do, or some of them are. If we can, reduce the cost of gain, so what it costs to put a kilo of beef on from $3.02 down to $2.35, there's around $9 million there. These are gross figures, obviously. And if we can improve ADG by 200 grams a day or 0.2 kg, there's another $6 million. So little tiny things have significant effects, and most of those are achievable just using simple principles. This is a trial. So 2 mobs of cattle, 90 head in each, were moved from one of our places about 300k away. And in that trial, we handled some of the cattle well and some not so well. You know, we weren't rough on them, but didn't look after them like the first mob. When those cattle arrived, 19 kilos. The mobs we did look after well lost 19 kilos, or about 5% of their body weight. Animals we didn't look after so well lost 29 kilos, or 8%. So it's a fairly significant change. That's, you know, roughly $35 a head, or 10 kilos an animal that was lost in transit. You know, every time you move 1,000 head, it's 35 grand that you're mucking around with. And we sort of moved around 300,000 head last year. So if we, you know, that's a difference for us of about $10.5 million if we weren't watching what we were doing in transporting animals around the business. Some of the things that, you know, are those things we talk about as far as what we do to an animal that we don't really see is one of the things called non-eaters, or some health issues, but non-eaters or dead bellies. So rumen bacteria is very fragile, and it's you know, so important for an animal to have good rumen bacteria or microbes. And so what happens is that after about 12, 24 hours, things in the rumen start to change. The motility or movement of the rumen starts to weaken and get less, but also the bacteria start to die off. And after about 24 hours, you're really starting to step into some pretty ordinary territory as far as that goes. And after 36 hours, you know, there is very, very minimal bacteria left in the digestive system at all. So what happens is when we try and feed those when they get to their destination, is that they will eat. They'll actually eat for about 4 days, and I'll show you a graph shortly. And then everything about them tells them they're hungry. You know, their habits, their hormones, their systems tell them they're hungry, so they'll eat. But it actually, after about 4 days, there's nothing in there to get rid of it, so they just block up. And I'll show you some charts of that later. Injuries, there's a significant amount of injuries that you know, we see a week after we unload them, or more, and around, you know, feet, shoulders, hips, all of those sorts of things. The respiratory disease, you know, these are all results of handling. So respiratory disease, very common in any weaning operation, North Australia. Anytime an animal's locked in a yard, or anytime other animals are put in there and there's commingling stresses, you're going to get respiratory disease. You may not see it because it actually takes about, it's usually, you don't see BRD for a minimum of about 10 days after they become stressed, but it's usually around day 19 or day 21 for some reason that animals start to get really you know, higher incidence of BRD. So if you've had them in the yards and out, you're not going to see it. And but it is there. It's in all parts of the country, and it's a very, very relevant disease. It's not uncommon for, you know, 15, 20% of the herd to have some form of respiratory disease. Feet abscesses, done a lot of work around feet health. It's a significant issue in the industry, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then dark cutting is something else if they're going to abattoir. Here's just some quick slides around BRD. It's what an animal looks like. There's some lung infections from BRD. It doesn't take that long for an animal to end up looking like that. There is some acute pleurisy, same thing. Again, doesn't take that long. Pericarditis, inflammation of the heart sac, another form of BRD. So feet abscesses, I'll talk about them. Feet abscesses are the result of an animal's foot wearing a hole in it and the bacteria getting in. So the animal's hoof is about 3 to 6 mil thick. And anytime you see an animal sliding, or you hear that noise, or you see that white chalk on concrete or any surface, hard gravel, that is the start of a hole in the toe. They usually get abscesses more in the hind toes, and sometimes more on the inside claw, because that's the toe they twist on. Depends how they're twisting. And so, but once that hole is once there's a hole there, the bacteria gets in there, and it's like an air track, but it tries to find a way into the hoof or out of the hoof. You're lucky it comes out. If it goes into the bone structures, it's actually there's not much you can do about it. Penicillin, people use penicillin, but the blood supply isn't great down there, and it doesn't do much at all. So if you are handling cattle and they're running, you often see people standing in a position near a race or something, and there's cattle running back and forward constantly trying to work out how to get away from this pressure or person, and they're sliding their feet. When they go to jump out of a crush, and they slide their feet in the crush, or they come out the other side of the crush and they slip sideways, they're all great ways of getting feet abscesses. And it's actually very common. One of the reasons that people don't talk about or do anything about it is because they see it and there's not much they can do. But there's a lot of work done around tipping tables, and once I worked out how prevalent feet issues are, it changed the way we design yards, races, the way we work cattle, the way we design crushes, the way we let them in and out of crushes, all sorts of things. So you can see there's a toe abscess. The one on the left, it's come in here. It's tried to find its way out, and it's come out through the back there. This one's come along and it's come out, and luckily it's come up the side and out through there. Here's another one. So these have got blocks on them. So there's a lot of work done around blocks now. But some really good ways around doing that. Race design, yard design, the length of time you have cattle under pressure. Some yards, the cattle seem to be in a pressure zone forever. But if you can get them in through the system and out, the quicker the better. Rubber in key areas. There's a lot of work being done on rubber nowadays. In crushes and out of crushes and all sorts of areas. Cattle handling is so significant when it comes to, one of the things that we did had a look at was a lot of working yards are 4 meters wide. So if you're walking down to an animal to bring some up, and you're walking down there, they'll ball up in the end and move around, and then there's not much space, so they race past you. So even if you widen your races or your yards to say 5 meters, for example, it takes so much pressure off them. We did once go to 6 meters in doing that, and that was great for them to be able to walk around and move away. But once they start coming back, it's a bit harder to hold them. Avoiding wet, muddy areas, feed baths, tipping crushes, and avoid periods on rough grounds. One of the things we also do is cause leaky gut. And so if you look at it's about the intestinal permeability, but the cells in your digestive tract in a good healthy animal are very tight and bound together. And so that's the wall of your rumen, for example, or digestive system. And then these are the bacteria floating around, good and bad. So it puts up and behind that is your blood flow. And so what happens in leaky gut, anytime we upset an animal, is that those membranes separate and the bad bacteria get through and get into your bloodstream. So I've had questions around probiotics and all of those sorts of things. They do help buffer those areas, but stress is the main reason for that. What happens then, once that bacteria gets into your bloodstream, your system goes into a defensive mode and puts a lot of energy into that rather than production. That's a good example. Going through the rumen wall into the liver, getting things like liver abscesses is just one example of what happens. Performance after handling. So this is really important stuff. I want to show you that, when we handle animals, there's significant effects. So if you look here, the blue line is an as-fed consumption, and the red line is dry matter. But you can see we build cattle up slowly. So we feed, then we bump them, then we hold and hold, bump them again, hold, bump, hold, held for 3 days. So you can see there, those cattle ate 16 kilos for the rest of their life when we looked after them and did things well, or they were looked after before they got to us as well. Here's some cattle that we actually went and did a handling on in the middle of their feed program. We brought them round for some weight checks and things like that. We obviously didn't do a good job. But you can see there that they only ever ate 14 kilos again for the rest of their life. So these are the things we do to animals that, they're not short-term things. One of the things with handling cattle is, to talk about low stress. It's not a term I sort really promote. It's actually, we need cattle to probably understand and be able to handle stress, is what we need to do. We've got a job to do. We need to do it well. We need to support the animals in that. But we also need to, those animals couldn't handle any sort of stress at all, or we did something pretty wrong. There's a feed chart where in the middle here, we've actually done the right thing, and they've maintained consumptions, and we've done that twice. Here's the non-eaters that I was talking about. So, this is why it's so vital, those cattle that that are on a long trip or any of that, if they're rumen back, rumen is not going to have feed for, 24 hours, then we really need to consider what we're doing. This is that non-eating. So you can see day one, we put 8 kilos in front of them, and they actually told us that day that something wasn't okay, or the next day. But day 4, they just did not eat a thing. And look how long it took us to get even 12 kilos out of them. So you can see there the influences that gut bacteria has on an animal and how long a term effect it has. Here's the same thing. This is another mob of cattle, different to that one. So again, started them on 8 kilos where we should have. The top line is when we start cattle off, we have two kind of boundaries that we try and stay in between, and that's based on their energy requirement and their stages of feeding and all of those sorts of things. But you can see there, we were hoping to have them above that orange line, and maybe at or just below the grey line. But you can see the effects that happened there. We just never got them back. They were on the bottom the whole trip. And these are cattle that somebody's had before us, and they've actually done quite a bit of damage to them somehow. And you can see there, we actually never got these. We'd try them, they'd throw it back. We'd try them again, they'd throw it back. We got them to eat 13 kilos for one day, and you can see it's just a downhill slide. So it's a long-term effect. This is a chart. I need to hurry up a bit, sorry. If, these are cattle that were looked after well in their life, and these cattle made it to the feedlot in 22 months, and it took 26 months for these to get to the feedlot or into a feeding system. The cattle that did get there at the right stage did 1.59 while they were there. These cattle only did 1.3. But the interesting thing is that once the cattle were doing well most of their life, when they sold them, 95% of the animals were in spec that got there in 22 months, well, versus only 69% of the animals once they, started to lose their wheels. This is meat quality, dark cutting. Hopefully we've all seen or understand what that is, but it's basically whenever we're handling animals, we're actually building glycogen levels in their system. When we go to, in the rigor mortis process or process in the cold room, the animal, that glycogen gets converted into lactic acid. So the ideal lactic acid is between 5.3 and 5.7 of meat. So we actually need the right amount of lactic acid to bring the meat into those levels. If we deplete that glycogen, which happens very, very easily with things like, stress, jiggers, changing their feeding, all sorts of things relate to, we deplete that glycogen level, and when they go through the process, they miss the window. You can see that it costs a lot of money, and quite, well, that's the incidence of it. It can be from 0 to, 5. That's pretty bad incidence there. And, but, that's how easily it can happen. So that's pretty much about most of the things I wanted to cover in the presentation. We only got 15 minutes left. So I think an important thing is remember, know your cattle, know about health, know about their gut systems and all of those things. Know your customers, what are they doing with their cattle? If you're in the transport industry and you turn up and they're standing around doing the right thing with their cattle and, looking after them, then don't get out and start yelling and screaming and, hitting cattle and all sorts of things. If people are doing that, well, then that's up to you, but I wouldn't be doing it. Know the destination or the requirements. Where are they going? What are they going to do with them? You know, is it short trip? Is it a long trip? You know, do I need to feed them, fill them up? And I would recommend feeding cattle right to the point of trucking. Good quality hay, good quality water, and that does go against some policies around effluent management and those sorts of things in trucks. But I'm here to talk about animal performance and animal health, and that rumen bacteria is so important. And then understand the consequences and that supply chain. You know, we talked at the start there, you know, it's at least 11, 12 times that an animal goes through something like that. And if you can reduce that, then, you know, it's so easy to keep animals on a good plane and, you know, a good production cycle. So at that point, I think that's about it. We'll move back to Greg for some questions.